Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Diamond Net, and today I'm going to be talking about Stoicism in its yin and yang facets. So today's video is all about the yin and yang of Stoicism. So before we get into the meat of the topic, we really have to hammer down some definitions first. So I'm going to start first with yin and yang. Now, yin and yang is a very complex topic, so I'm just going to give you like a really brief snapshot of what that is, just for the sake of understanding the premise of the video. So basically, yin and yang are two polar subtle qualities that exist in all living and non-living systems. So this means that these qualities can be found in something as small as an atom or as large as the cosmos. Now, they're polar opposites. So on one side we have yin, and yin qualities are basically that which is associated with the feminine, and it has to do with beingness, and it also has to do with the internal relationship to things. Now, on the other hand, we have yang, which has esoterically masculine qualities. It has to do with doingness and the external relationship to things. So we can think about yin and yang in the simplest terms as being yin being feminine, internal and being related, and then yang as being masculine, external, and doing related. So that's how those two polarities really come together. All right, so we also have to define what Stoicism is. Now, first I'm going to give my definition of Stoicism. My definition of Stoicism is basically being able to make decisions and to live your life without your emotions ruling you. So basically being able to have discipline when you need to have discipline, and being able to face with things that are uncomfortable when you need to, without being overtly affected by your emotions. Now, it doesn't mean you don't use your emotions as a navigational system, because that's what the emotions are there for. It just means that you're mastering your emotions. Your emotions aren't mastering you. Now, I looked up the dictionary definition of Stoicism, and it defines Stoicism as the endurance of pain or hardship without the display of feelings or without complaint. Now, the issue with this definition is that it frames Stoicism as having to do with endurance, which means it's something you actively do, and then it also frames it as something that has to do with external expression. So again, having to do with that yang element of things. But there's a very strong yin element to Stoicism. So the definition here in the dictionary, and in terms of the way that I generally see people orient to the topic of Stoicism, is something more like doing Stoicism as opposed to being Stoic. And Yin Stoicism has to do with being Stoic. So these are the two facets of Stoicism that I want to look into, the Yin and the Yang facet. Now, looking at the Yang facet of Stoicism first. So we have what I call the Stoicism of the stone wall. So the stone wall, it's something that's hard. It's something that's difficult to break through. And if someone goes and hits the stone wall, chances are it's not going to break. And so what this is basically going into hardening up, armoring oneself so that the emotions don't hit you, so the experiences don't bring up uncomfortable emotions. So it's keeping sort of a distance from the emotions and kind of trying to make ourselves a bit numb to the emotions. And one of the things with this is good in a temporary situation. So if there's a situation where you have to essentially put on a tough face, and you go into the Stoicism of the stone wall, then that's going to help you really protect yourself. Now, there's another type of Stoicism, which is the more yin kind of Stoicism, which is a deeper form of Stoicism, which has to do with being Stoic, and that is the Stoicism of the Waterfall. So the stone wall, if you hit the stone wall, chances are the stone wall is not going to break. But let's say that you drive a semi-truck into the stone wall, it probably will break, So eventually that stone wall is going to break down. Armor can break. Now, when you are like a waterfall, when you are so allowing and so receptive to any experience and any emotion, there's no way that you can break that waterfall. You can hit it as hard as you like. You could drive a semi-truck through it. The water will never break because it is so soft and so allowing. And so this is the way to think about the yin and yang elements of Stoicism. So we have yang, which is kind of like the gray rock method. It's basically kind kind of shut everything out. Try to not feel your emotions. Whereas the yin element of Stoicism is feel your experiences and your emotions so completely that they land no blow on you. So the yin Stoicism of the Waterfall has to do with surrender and non-resistance, whereas the yang element of Stoicism, that stone wall, has to do with hardening yourself, protecting yourself, which is good, especially if you haven't developed the yin Stoicism first. So there are places for yang Stoicism. So there are times to harden up that way. There are times to just shut down to the emotions, and especially in times of survival. But over time, using the yang Stoicism of the stone wall will leave you kind of in a pressure cooker of a situation where you're keeping all of your emotions in, and that can create a lot of problems. So the yang Stoicism of the stone wall means shutting down to the emotions, shutting them off. Whereas the yin element of Stoicism has to do with a complete allowing of the emotions. That means being okay with experiencing any particular emotional state, including states like terror, including states like grief, including states like powerlessness, and being able to hold space for those emotions completely, despite the fact that these are very, very uncomfortable emotional states. This means that you're not attached to feeling any certain way, and you're not trying to get away from feeling any certain way. There's no grasping towards certain emotions and no aversion towards certain emotions. You allow whichever emotions come up to come up, no matter how pleasant or unpleasant those emotions are. So from the yin Stoicism of the Waterfall, any and all emotional states are okay. So the Stoicism of the stone wall says, I will become stoic by not feeling any of my emotions, whereas the Stoicism of the Waterfall says, I am willing to face with any and all experiences because I have no resistance to any and all experiences and the emotions that those experiences might trigger within me. So on that note, I would like to go a little bit into the emotions. So I want to give you a bit of an explanation as to what an emotion is. So an emotion can basically be broken down to a combination of sensations in the body, subtle sensations in the body, and then also what our mind tends to do with those subtle sensations. So let's say whenever we feel the emotion of anger, we're going to feel a sensation somewhere in our body that lets us know we're angry, and then our mind is usually going to respond to that. Now, the lion's share of an emotion is happening in the body as a subtle sensation, and really the mind element is, something that kind of reacts to it. So we could kind of say that the feelings are really at the core of what an emotion is. Now these emotions, these sensations in the body, play a very important role for us. Well, actually two very important roles that we'll talk about here. So the first role that I'll mention is that the emotions act as our navigation system. So these sensations that arise in the body generally tell us where our boundaries are, what we like, what we don't like, which direction we'd like to go in, and it basically help us make these kind of decisions in terms of what the trajectory we want our life to go on. We derive that information primarily from feeling states. Now, another role that the emotions play for us is our motivational system. So not only does it help us navigate, it also gives us urges to go in certain directions and urges to go away from other directions. So these two roles are very, very important. Now, when we are being stoic, we still want to use these tools because they're there for a reason. We just don't want those tools to run us. But now going back to the motivational system facet of the emotions, one of the ways to understand how that motivational system works is we're only ever going in two different directions. We're only ever going toward desired emotional states or away from undesired emotional states. So when we think that we want something or that we don't want something, what we really want or don't want isn't the thing itself, it's the feeling state that we think that we will experience on the other end of that. So let's take, for example, if I believe I want $1 million. So I say, okay, I want $1 million. Well, in reality, it's really about the emotional state that I perceive that the $1 million will either bring me toward or bring me away from. So an example of, like, let's say a toward motivation relative to that is, let's say that I want to earn $1 million because I think that like people will look at me a certain way because I've achieved this, and I'll get this feeling of being admired, and I'll feel this pride in myself. So let's say if I want $1 million for this reason, I'm not actually looking for the $1 million. I'm looking for the feeling of pride on the other end of it. The vehicle to the destination is the $1 million, but the destination itself is the pride that I will feel on the other end. Likewise, in terms of the negative motivation, the sense of going away from something, let's say that I'm in a real bind and I'm always like barely scraping by, and I feel like I'm just one paycheck away from being evicted, and I feel a lot of stress, and I feel a lot of instability, and I feel a lot of fear. So I say, oh my goodness, I want $1 million. Well, the $1 million again is not what I want. What I want is I want to not feel stress. I want to not feel fear, and I want to not feel insecurity. So I want to get away from those emotional states. So you see, so the thing that we think that we want is usually about the emotional states on the other end. So emotions are really the core language that the body speaks with that lets us know which direction we want to go in and which directions we don't want to go in. Now, if we take the example of the $1 million in terms of our motivational system and going toward or away from certain emotions, and if we take that in relation to the Yin Stoicism of the Waterfall, essentially the Yin Stoicism of the Waterfall is completely okay with experiencing any and all emotional states. That means that, let's say if I take the I'm trying to get $1 million to get a sense of pride, that means that like in the Yin Stoicism of the Waterfall, the Yin Stoicism of the Waterfall would appreciate pride, but it doesn't grasp toward pride. So it doesn't necessarily say, I need this to make my life. It feels like, oh, it's nice if pride passes through, but it's not something I'm really grasping for. Whereas on the other side, let's say if I'm going with the fear and the insecurity and the instability, all these senses that come from the scarcity of money and the sense that the $1 million would answer to that, ultimately, the Yin Stoicism of the Waterfall is completely allowing oneself to feel that sense of fear, to feel that sense of insecurity, to feel that sense of anxiety. So it's being perfectly okay with those emotional states and allowing them to pass through you fully and really fully feeling them and being okay with sitting with those emotions. So the Yang Stoicism is, oh, I'm going to block myself off and I'm not going to feel any of that anxiety. I'm not going to feel any of the worry. I'm not going to feel any of the instability. But the Yin Stoicism is so surrendering, is so allowing, that it allows even those emotions to come through. So in this way, we're not in the space of grasping and having aversions towards certain emotional states. We are in complete acceptance of any and all emotions that pass through us. When we're experiencing the Yin Stoicism of the Waterfall, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to get into an orientation of immersive detachment relative to the emotions. So immersive in the sense that we're experiencing it fully, we're holding space for it fully. We're allowing our being to really absorb it and to allow it to process through completely. But we're also detached. We're not on the roller coaster with the emotion. We're not allowing the emotion to make us react certain ways, and we're not allowing the emotion to take control. We are the master of the emotions. We are observing it from afar, but we're also really immersed in it. We're learning from it. We're allowing it to send its message to us, because ultimately that's what the emotions are for. They're there as our navigation system. They're there as our motivational system. It's there to send messages to you. And when emotions come through the body, it's an automatic process, just like the heartbeat, just like the brain doing its thing. Basically, it's just as much automatic as anything else. So you will not be able to stop yourself from feeling emotions because they are just a happening of the body. And when the emotions come up, the way that I would best describe it is that they do a particular dance within the body. So if you hold space for this dance, you are practicing the yin stoicism. Whereas if you resist against that dance and you try to stop that dance from happening, you're trying to shut it down, and what happens is those emotions can't really process fully. And so if you hold space for any and all emotions, what basically happens is that these emotions can do their dance and leave you very quickly. And there was a story that I had heard some years back, and I don't remember all the details of it, but basically the story was that there was a monk, and he was sitting there and he was meditating, and he was always in meditation every day. So he was very well practiced in terms of developing this yin being element in relation to Stoicism, but just in general. And so one day someone came to him and told him that his mother had passed away. And what happened is that that monk stopped meditating in that moment, and in 1 minute, 2 minutes, just wailed and bawled and like just completely released all of these emotions. And essentially, the story was that he was able to just go right back to meditating. So the grief process, which usually takes quite a while for the average person to grieve, because we have to get through all of this resistance, and we have to, essentially get to the point where we can allow ourselves to even let the process come through. That monk was able to allow the process so completely and be so yin and so stoic that that emotion essentially worked its way through him in the matter of minutes and left him. And so this is sort of what yin stoicism is about. It's being able to feel your emotions so fully that it lands no blow, just in the same way that you can punch water as much as you want, but it's not going to land that hit, because water has no resistance, or very little resistance, I should say. But let's just say, if you're punching water, you don't have any resistance there. If you punch a stone wall, the stone wall has resistance. It's going to land the blow. It might not break it, but it's still going to land a blow. And so in the same way that this monk has developed this waterfall-like nature, where you can, hit it with any emotion, even the worst emotions, and he can handle them completely. This is what it entails to really become stoic in a being sense. Being stoic is being okay with experiencing any and all emotional states, including any experiences that might lead up to certain emotional states. So the only way to truly transcend the emotions' control over us and to truly be stoic is to be so allowing of our emotions that they pass right through us. And so that way we can have that sense of immersive detachment, and that way we can make wise decisions from our emotions without our emotions kind of pulling us in this direction and being led by our passions and our temptations, and and being so afraid to face with certain experiences because we're afraid of feeling fear, or we're afraid of feeling dread, or we're afraid of being experiencing some other kind of emotion that we've experienced before in the past that was traumatic. So ultimately, whenever we end up holding space for emotions so completely, we're completely free to do anything we want to do and anything that we're capable of doing, because we're willing to face with any and all emotional states. And so any and all experiences are okay. So let's say that somebody is afraid of heights. So somebody who's afraid of heights doesn't want to go up high because they feel a really intense negative emotion when they're up high. So if they allow themselves to experience that feeling of, oh, this doesn't feel pleasant, then if they have to, for whatever reason, go up high to, save a kitten or something like that, then they're going to be able to hold space emotionally for that state, for that emotional state. And essentially, they're going to allow themselves to go and save the kitten if they have to. And so this is where Stoicism has its real efficacy, is in the sense that you can face with any and all experiences if you are willing to face with any and all emotions. So given all the information that I've shared in the video, I wanted to give you a practice for allowing you to develop that stoicism of being. So a stoicism that really goes so deep in your being that you really don't have to act stoically. You really don't have to put on that armor or put on that front. It's not something that you do. It's something that just exudes from your being, because you have developed such an okayness with any and all emotional states, and such a non-grasping, non-aversive relation to any and all emotional states, that essentially you allow yourself to experience anything. And when it comes to that, it comes down to being okay with the emotions. And so one thing that's very positive about this is that there's a finite amount of emotions. So we as human beings are not infinite creatures. We have a finite spectrum of what we can experience. In the same way that we experience a finite spectrum of colors, and in the same way that we can experience a finite spectrum of sound, we also have a finite spectrum of emotions that, again, arise as sensations in the body. And so we can think about them as being organized under 5 main categories. So there are 5 main affects. So we have joy, sadness, fear, anger, and disgust. So just like in the Inside Out movie. And under each of these umbrellas, we have other more nuanced emotions. So let's say under the umbrella of joy, we have things like bliss and contentment and euphoria and happiness. Or underneath the window of sadness, we have melancholy, we have depression, we have being forlorn in some kind of way. So there are a lot of different nuanced emotions that are underneath each of these umbrellas. But ultimately, we're working still with a finite range of emotions. Now, the emotions act essentially as a language. So when they're acting as our navigation system or our motivational system, they are the way that the body communicates something to us. And so with that language, the language essentially has an alphabet, and the alphabet in that language are each of these emotional states, these little micro emotions, like I had said, like euphoria and things like this. So those micro emotions are part of the emotional alphabet. And the emotional alphabet has a limited number of characters. So if I'm just going to guess how many emotions that a human being is capable of experiencing, and I'm not sure exactly what the exact number is, let's just say maybe it's 200 emotions that we're capable of experiencing. That means that there are 200 characters in the emotional alphabet that we can learn and that we can discover our relationship to. So chances are within this emotional alphabet, there are already many emotional characters or emotional letters, emotional sensations that we already don't have a grasping and aversion relationship to, where we feel just fine with experiencing a particular emotion and we don't have any sense that we're trying to grasp at it and go toward it and keep it with us or to try to push it away. And so what we want to do is we want to develop that relationship to any and all characters within that finite emotional alphabet. And so what we can do is we can look at different emotional states and we can say, am I grasping toward this? Or am I aversive to it? And if I'm grasping toward it, why is it that I'm grasping toward it? Or if I'm aversive to it, why am I aversive to it? And through that, we can learn to hold space for that emotion more and more. We can sort of train ourselves to be able to, become like water, become so allowing of each of those characters in the emotional alphabet that we allow those sensations to play out in the body. And so in this way, there's that saying, the only thing to fear is fear itself. This means that the only thing to really fear in any emotional state is the emotion itself. And once you drop the resistance to the emotion, you essentially, and also drop the grasping to the emotion, what essentially happens is that you're able to experience any and all things. And so going through to each of those letters in the emotional alphabet really allows you to go in and pinpoint one that you might have some kind of grasping and aversion toward and drop resistance to and drop craving to by understanding deeper why those cravings are there. Now there's a book that I really appreciate in relation to this. It's called the Emotion Thesaurus. And essentially the Emotion Thesaurus is a book that it's not designed for consciousness work or, working with the emotions at all. It's a book designed for writers and actors so that they can get their emotional states right with their characters, like let's say when someone's writing their character or, when they're acting it out. And so this book is really great because it has probably a couple hundred emotions there, probably close to the amount that's in the emotional alphabet. And essentially what it does is in each page it has a certain emotion, and it talks about what the emotion feels like internally and like how a person might act during that. And so basically that book, again, it's not usually used for consciousness work, but I use it with my clients quite often, and I found that it's quite helpful in helping people pinpoint emotional states. So if you go into that book or into any, let's say, list of emotions, you can pick out the ones that you feel the most grasping toward and the most aversion toward, and start to work on why that is that there's that grasping and aversion. Because ultimately you want to develop that sense of acceptance and essentially allowing things to come and go. So essentially, whenever one of those emotions that you want to experience comes along, you want to be able to allow it to be there and enjoy it for when it's there, but not to like grasp at it once it starts to go. And then like emotional states, let's say that you feel aversion to, you want to allow it to be there without trying to push it away. And so the way to get in touch with that is basically to become aware of times when you have that grasping and aversion to begin with. Becoming conscious of it is really the first step in the process. And then also asking yourself deeper questions about it. So that's my recommendation for developing the Stoicism of being, going into each individual emotion and trying to drop resistance to that particular emotional state and drop the grasping toward that emotional state. That's it in a nutshell. Anyway, so that's all I have for you for today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and click the like button below and subscribe and leave me a comment down below. Also, if you're interested in my 6-step process for shadow work, what I highly recommend is checking out my Shadow Integration Masterclass, and you can check that out at shadowintegration.org/masterclass. Anyway, that's all I have for you for now, and until next time, keep becoming more you.